What is the theology that has shaped the understanding and practice of worship in the Filipino way? Christian worship, classically defined, is our response to the salvific actions of God in our lives, in history and in creation. We can basically proceed from this classical definition when thinking about Filipinizing our worship. God was in the fine prints of our story as a people. We have that love story with God that we need to celebrate. Celebrate not in the Euro-American ways of those who introduced the Christian faith to us, but in our own distinct devotional ways as Filipinos. This is the Christological starting point of our Filipinizing our worship. God became Filipino. We saw God as active in our stories and struggles as a people. We were formed into a people with God's mighty hands and outstretched arms. That is and should be a basic Christian Filipino affirmation. We even have our own Exodus version in the struggle of the Indio against the forces of colonial oppression. Historically, we trace our beginnings as a national community from that salvific event. There are, like in the Hebrew story, precursors to our own Exodus. These are the smaller narratives that are revelatory of God being present and actively at work. Together, these smaller narratives constitute and are now weaved into our grand narrative as a national community. This focus on the smaller narratives is now an ongoing theological project among our Christian sisters and brothers in indigenous communities in the country. We also see our Filipino-ness, our identity, our languages, our talents, and their social, cultural, religious, and artistic expressions as gifts, mga kaloob ng Diyos. The gifts of God to our race must be treasured, celebrated, enhanced, and shared to give witness to the beauty, the power, and creativity of God. This is our response to God's gifts and salvific actions in our lives as a people and as a national community. Now, what are the elements of worship in Filipino faith communities? We can say that there may no longer be a pure Filipino way, and that the Filipino has evolved, especially the diaspora Filipino, into a cosmopolitan citizen of the world. The forms may be cosmopolitan, but the soul stays as Filipino. We start from that narrative of the soul. Slowly, from this platform, we begin to realize that the soul is actually not bodiless. There is body to our national soul. However wrapped this body is with layers and layers of cultural garbs, Western garbs, the body surfaces at the end of the day as the primary designer. Normally, in our worship services, we start by playing the organ or the piano, or here the choral and trua. But alternatively, we can play instruments like the kalalang, or beat the gongs and the gansas of our indigenous communities. This brings us closer to the earth. This brings us closer to God's garden and become gods again. We normally start our services by lighting candles and scents, our soul and body being transported to God's realm. Alternatively, we can also start the service by planting the reed sticks or the pudong. The pudong is like it's a grass variety in the Cordilleras, which they use for their own rituals. When we plant the pudong, we reclaim the space where we are gathered as sacred, and that the spirits of our ancestors and the spirits in our forests and mountains are with us. The whole created reality, seen and unseen, are or is with us, crying glory to our Creator God or Lover God. In the planting of the pudong, we declare that God is the creator and owner of everything, not this and that mining company. In planting the pudong, we declare our faith that everyone and everything we have left behind in our coming to this place is safely secured under God's watch. These include our loved ones who are bedridden and left in the house, our homes and properties, our places of work and play, and our communities. Also, normally in our services, we celebrate the communion by staying subdued and solemn and meditative and reflective. Alternatively, we can do a piging around the table, a fiesta around the table. Remember that the meal table ritual before the monarchization of worship was a piging in the neighborhood among families in house churches. We can be cheerful and lively, festive at some point, especially in the sharing of bread and wine, ala kanyaw ba? But we can be festive throughout, from beginning to end in some of our communion services. Let loose the Filipino body and soul. Moreover, we can conclude a celebration with traditional Pinoy manu po. Manu po. This was actually a proposal from a colleague, a Tagalog liturgiologist based at Siliman Divinity School. The act is a two-way act. The manu po is a two-way act, a mutual act of dispensing and receiving blessing, and recognizes the spiritual leadership of our elders, even as we equally affirm the importance of blessing our elders with our manu po gesture. There are so many things that we can contribute to the church universal, to the church ecumenical. Worshipping in the Filipino way is our contribution